The massive doors of the Interstellar Assembly's grand chamber swung open with a resonant thud that silenced the murmuring voices of 200 alien species. Through the entrance strode the human delegation, their faces set in expressions of granite that betrayed nothing of the storm about to break. Ambassador Chen Wei led the group, her ceremonial dress uniform pristine, each medal and commendation catching the light from the chamber's crystalline ceiling. Behind her walked the military attaché, Colonel Santos, and Earth's chief intelligence officer, Dr. Sarah Morrison. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. The Kraxan delegation, seated in their elevated position among the senior species platforms, shifted uncomfortably. Their chitinous plates clicked against their seats, a sound that, to those who knew Kraxan body language, betrayed profound unease. The emergency session of the 897th cycle of the Interstellar Assembly is now in session, announced first speaker Tilara, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with formal patterns. We are gathered here to address the accusations of excessive retribution leveled against the Sol Federation. Excessive. Ambassador Chen's voice cut through the chamber like a plasma torch through hull plating. First speaker, with your permission, I believe context is required before such terms are employed. Hilara's patterns flickered with surprise at the interruption, but she gestured for Chen to continue. The human ambassador raised a small device, and the chamber's massive holofields hummed to life. The first images struck the assembly like a physical blow. The agricultural colony of New Montana appeared, its vast wheat fields golden under an alien sun. The timestamp showed 3 standard months prior. Several of the younger species representatives leaned forward, not yet understanding what they were about to witness. The Kraxan ships appeared from hyperspace like dark predators, their characteristic purple drives flaring against the peaceful sky. There was no warning, no demand for surrender. The raids began immediately. Ambassador Chen let the footage play in silence as the Kraxan forces systematically destroyed the colony's minimal defenses. The cameras caught everything. The brave but futile resistance of the colonial militia, the methodical theft of resources, the casual destruction of infrastructure that had taken decades to build. 3,417 colonists, Chen stated, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Farmers, engineers, teachers, children. Each word fell like a hammer blow. 243 dead, 812 injured, all of them civilians. The footage shifted to another colony, then another, each attack following the same pattern. Swift, brutal, efficient. The Kraxan ambassador rose, his mandibles clicking rapidly. These were legitimate military targets. The Sol Federation had no right to. Military targets. Colonel Santos stepped forward, his dark eyes fixed on the Kraxan ambassador. Please, explain to the assembly how a school qualifies as a military target. Or perhaps you could elaborate on the strategic significance of a hydroponics facility growing medicinal plants. The chamber erupted in overlapping translations as species conferred with their neighbors. The Kraxan ambassador's translator struggled to keep up with his rapid clicking. The Sol Federation's response was disproportionate. The complete destruction of 300 mining facilities was precisely proportionate. Dr. Morrison spoke for the first time, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the chaos. She stepped forward, raising her own device. New images filled the holofield. Hundreds of Kraxan mining facilities, each one destroyed with surgical precision. Notice, if you will, the pattern of destruction. Every facility's economic infrastructure, destroyed. Every civilian quarter, untouched. Every evacuation protocol, given exactly 15 minutes to complete before detonation. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This hadn't been revenge. This had been mathematics. Ambassador Chen surveyed the chamber, meeting the eyes, optical sensors, and sensory organs of each senior delegation. The Sol Federation believes in proportional response. The Kraxan Empire destroyed 3 of our colonies. We destroyed 300 of theirs. The difference. She paused, letting the tension build. We made sure everyone survived to learn from the experience. The assembly chambers descended into absolute silence as the holofields showed the final images. Precise, calculated destruction contrasted against the Kraxen's indiscriminate violence. The message was clear. Humanity hadn't just responded. They had delivered a lesson written in fire across the stars. 3 months earlier, Supreme Commander Krixtal of the Kraxen Empire stood before the tactical display, his mandibles twitching with satisfaction as he watched the raid recordings from the human colonies. His carapace gleamed under the purple lighting of the command center, polished to a perfect shine for the occasion. "Look how they scatter," he clicked to his subordinates, gesturing at the fleeing human colonists with one of his primary arms. "Like prey species everywhere. They build their nests in our expansion zones and expect us to respect their claimed territories." His executive officer, Sub-Commander Vexna, stepped forward with the calculated precision expected of a Kraxen military officer. "Supreme Commander, our analysis of human diplomatic responses suggests they will file formal protests through the assembly. Perhaps economic sanctions." Krixtal's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "Of course they will. They're diplomats and merchants, not warriors. The assembly has made them soft." He turned to face the gathered command staff. "How many ships did they lose defending their colonies?" "None, Supreme Commander," Vexna responded. "They retreated before engaging our main force." "Exactly." Krixtal's clicking grew louder. "Even their defensive units fled. The humans have forgotten the old ways, the strong taking from the weak. They will complain, threaten sanctions, and ultimately accept their place in the natural order." The next few days seemed to confirm Krixtal's assessment. Human ships across known space began returning to their ports. Diplomatic outposts closed their doors. Trade routes fell silent. In the assembly, the human seats stood empty. 1 week after the raids, Sub-Commander Vexna entered Krixtal's private chambers, her normally pristine carapace showing signs of stress-induced molting. "Supreme Commander, we've lost all contact with human space. Their communication networks have gone dark. Their ships have vanished from our tracking systems." Krixtal waved 2 of his arms dismissively. "They hide in their territories, nursing their wounds. This is the way of prey species. Prepare the second wave of raids." But the second wave never launched. As the silence from human space stretched into its second week, unease began to spread through the Kraxen military command. Other species in the assembly started avoiding Kraxen representatives. The ancient Vindari, notorious for their warrior culture, withdrew their diplomatic mission without explanation. In his private moments, Krixtal began reviewing historical footage of human conflicts. What he saw disturbed him. Unlike the Kraxen way of immediate overwhelming force, humans had a history of methodical preparation before striking. Their wars weren't won through single, glorious battles, but through careful calculation and systematic destruction of enemy capabilities. On the 14th day of the silence, during the Festival of Ancestral Glory, Vexna burst into the command center. Her carapace had turned the pale blue of extreme distress. "Supreme Commander, our deep space monitoring stations, they're detecting something. Hundreds of signatures, appearing and disappearing across our territory. They're using gravitational anomalies we thought were impossible to navigate." Krixtal's mandibles froze mid-click. "Impossible. Our scientists assured us those routes were unusable. The gravitational stresses would tear any ship apart." The humans, Vexna's translator struggled to convey her agitation. "They're not using standard drives. They've modified their ships specifically for these conditions. They're everywhere, Supreme Commander." As if to punctuate her words, the command center screens lit up with hundreds of alarm signals. Mining facilities across 3 sectors reported simultaneous contact with unidentified vessels. Then 4 sectors, then 12. "How?" Krixtal demanded, his composure cracking. "How did they map our entire territory without detection?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Every screen in the command center suddenly displayed the same message, written in perfect Kraxan script. You taught us where to look. We learned well. In that moment, Supreme Commander Krixtall realized his species' fatal error. They had mistaken humanity's preference for diplomacy as a sign of weakness. Now, as alerts flooded in from across Kraxan space, he understood the terrible truth. Humans weren't diplomatic because they were weak. They were diplomatic because they were terrifyingly good at being anything else. 2 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Morrison watched lines of code scroll across 100 holographic displays. The air hummed with the sound of quantum processors working at full capacity and the subtle vibration of cooling systems keeping the massive computers from melting down. Show me Network Penetration Team 6's progress, she commanded, and one of the displays expanded to fill her field of view. A 3-dimensional representation of Kraxan data architecture appeared, glowing points of light representing their security nodes. They never imagined someone would attack them this way, Lieutenant Chen remarked, her fingers dancing across her neural interface. The Kraxans put all their faith in quantum encryption and their biological authentication systems. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They forgot the first rule of information security. Every system is vulnerable because every system requires user access. She gestured at a cluster of compromised nodes. How did you bypass their chitinous interface requirements? We didn't, Chen replied, her eyes never leaving her work. We discovered they never bothered changing the default administrative overrides their system architects built in. Their confidence in their biological security made them lazy. Across the room, another analyst called out, Dr. Morrison, we've successfully mapped the entire Helios sector mining network, uploading structural weaknesses and optimal strike points now. Sarah moved through the facility like a conductor directing a symphony of cyber warfare. Each team had spent the past week infiltrating different aspects of Kraxan infrastructure. Some focused on their navigation networks, others on their defense grids, and still others on their economic systems. Status report, she commanded, reaching the central planning station. Colonel Santos, representing Earth's military command, stepped forward. We've achieved penetration of 94% of their critical systems. Their entire mining operation network is compromised. We have access to their emergency protocols, their evacuation procedures, everything. And they haven't detected us. That's the beautiful part, Santos grinned. They're so convinced of their technological superiority that they barely maintain their internal security systems. It's like they never imagined anyone could break through their outer defenses. Sarah turned to the main strategic display, where a map of Kraxan space glowed with thousands of targeted locations. Each point represented a mining facility, color-coded based on its economic importance to the Empire. Show me the simulation again, she ordered. The display came to life, showing the projected outcome of their planned response. Hundreds of synchronized strikes, each precisely calculated to destroy economic infrastructure while minimizing casualties. The simulation showed the cascading effect on the Kraxan economy. 1,000 paper cuts, each one carefully placed to cause maximum damage without being lethal. They expect us to either submit or respond with brute military force, Sarah mused, watching the simulation play out. They don't understand that humans learned long ago that true power isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about how precisely you can do it. An alert flashed across the main screen. One of the deep cover agents they'd planted in Kraxan space years ago was reporting in. Sarah expanded the message, and a new data stream began flowing into their systems. They're planning a celebration, she announced to the room. The Festival of Ancestral Glory. Their entire leadership will be attending ceremonies across their core worlds. She turned to Colonel Santos. How fitting. Mom. An analyst called out. Final penetration achieved. We now have complete access to their network. Awaiting your command. Sarah Morrison stood in the center of humanity's hidden nerve center, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the determined focus of her teams. On the screens around her, the vast expanse of Kraxan space lay exposed, every secret revealed, every weakness mapped. "Send the authorization code to all strike teams," she ordered. "But first, plant our message in their systems. I want them to understand exactly why this is happening." She paused, looking at the simulation one final time. "Let them learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." Across human space, strike teams received their final orders. The intelligence war was over. The real lesson was about to begin. The Kraxan mining facility on Helios Prime sparkled like a purple jewel against the gas giant's swirling atmosphere. Massive refineries processed precious heavy elements harvested from the planet's countless floating platforms, their work never ceasing as they fed the Empire's endless hunger for resources. Station Commander Zextil stood in his observation dome, watching the annual Festival of Ancestral Glory celebrations wind down. His workers had performed the traditional dance as well, their carapaces painted with luminescent markings that honored their warrior ancestors. A slight vibration ran through the deck plates beneath his feet. He clicked in irritation. Probably another calibration issue with the refinery's main processors. The human colonies they'd raided had similar equipment, all of it now safely repurposed for the greater glory of the Empire. His comm unit chimed. "Commander," his security chief's voice crackled with unusual static. "We're detecting unusual readings from several maintenance airlocks. The sensors must be malfunctioning. They're showing they're both open and closed simultaneously." Zextil's mandibles twitched. "Run a diagnostic and get maintenance tow." The observation dome's screen suddenly flickered to life, displaying a message in perfect Kraxan script. "You have 15 minutes to evacuate. This is not a drill. This is consequences." Across Kraxan space, in 300 mining facilities ranging from small asteroid operations to massive gas giant refineries, the same message appeared simultaneously. Evacuation sirens began to wail. Commander Zextil stood frozen for precisely 3 seconds before his military training kicked in. Full evacuation. All personnel to emergency pods. Security, scan for explosive devices. "Sir," his security chief's voice had risen an octave. "The scanners. They're being blocked." "No, not blocked. They're showing everything as normal. But they're not responding to commands. It's like something else is controlling them." In the darkness of space around the facility, modified human stealth ships emerged from gravitational anomalies the Kraxans had deemed unusable. Each vessel carried a strike team, and each team had trained for months for this exact moment. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Special Operations vessel, Silent Justice, watched her tactical display as her teams breached the facility's outer hull. "Remember," she transmitted to her squads, "precise damage only. Follow the structural maps exactly. We're not here for revenge. We're here to teach a lesson." The Kraxan evacuation proceeded in chaos. Emergency pods launched in streams from every facility across the Empire. Security forces rushed to protect critical infrastructure, only to find their weapons wouldn't respond to commands. Doors opened and closed seemingly at random, herding evacuees toward their escape routes. 13 minutes after the warning message, the last emergency pod launched from Helios Prime. Commander Zextil watched from the pod's viewport as human figures in advanced exosuits moved through his facility with practiced precision. "Sir," his security chief whispered, "they're not stealing anything. They're just planting devices with military precision, like they know exactly where to put them." At exactly 15 minutes, 300 Kraxan mining facilities detonated simultaneously. The explosions were surgical, processing centers destroyed, refineries collapsed, resource storage vaporized. But the destruction followed a pattern. Worker housing areas remained untouched. Emergency systems functioned perfectly. Not a single Kraxan life was lost. In the aftermath, as emergency pods were collected by rescue ships, the true scope of humanity's response became clear. The Kraxan Empire's entire mining infrastructure, representing trillions in resources and centuries of development, had been precision-targeted and destroyed in a single synchronized operation. Captain Chen stood on her bridge, watching the controlled demolition of the Helios Prime facility through her ship's cameras. "Confirm all personnel accounted for," she ordered. "All Craxan life signs safely evacuated," her XO reported. "Property damage exactly matches target parameters. No collateral damage." Chen nodded and opened a channel to Earth Command. Operation Reciprocity complete. All objectives achieved. Minimal deviation from projected outcome. As her ship prepared to return through the gravitational anomaly, she took one last look at the facility. The message humanity had sent was clear. We can strike anywhere, at any time, with perfect precision. And we choose exactly how much damage we do. The lesson had been delivered. Now they would wait to see if the Craxans were capable of learning it. The Imperial Palace on Craxan Prime had never felt so silent. Supreme Commander Crystal stood before the Emperor's inner chamber, his once pristine carapace now dulled with stress markings. The guards, normally clicking with quiet conversation, stood motionless as statues. "Enter," came the Emperor's voice, transmitted through the ceremonial speakers. The chamber doors split open with a hydraulic hiss. Emperor Zaxthrax the 14th sat upon the crystalline throne, his massive form wrapped in the traditional colors of imperial authority. His primary arms gripped the throne's armrests tight enough to leave marks. "Speak," the Emperor commanded. Crystal moved forward on trembling legs. "Your Imperial Majesty, we've received a message from the humans." A message. The Emperor's mandibles clicked with barely controlled rage. "They destroy 300 of our most productive mining facilities, cripple our economy, and then send a message." "Yes, Your Majesty." "They..." Crixtel's translator struggled to convey his discomfort. "They request our presence at specific coordinates." The Emperor rose from his throne, his full height casting a shadow over the Supreme Commander. "They dare to summon us. The coordinates correspond to the ruins of the Nexus Prime facility, our largest mining operation in the Outer Rim." "They..." Crixtel's voice faltered. "They say if we wish to understand, we must see it in person." Hours later, the Imperial flagship dropped out of hyperspace near the Nexus Prime coordinates. The Emperor stood on the bridge, surrounded by his highest military advisors and a full complement of guards. Through the main viewport, the ruins of the facility floated in space, perfectly illuminated by the system's twin stars. "Majesty," the sensor officer called out, "we're detecting a transmission originating from the ruins." "Display it," the Emperor commanded. The bridge's holofields activated, but instead of a human face or a text message, they showed footage. The raids on the human colonies played first, followed by detailed calculations. Resources stolen, lives lost, infrastructure destroyed, all catalogued with precise figures. Then the footage shifted to the synchronized destruction of Craxan mining facilities. Each explosion was matched with exact economic impact figures. The total damage to Craxan infrastructure was displayed. Exactly 1,000 times the damage inflicted on the human colonies. Finally, a simple message appeared, broadcasting not just to the Imperial flagship, but across every communication frequency in Craxan space. "You took from 3 of our colonies. We took from 300 of yours. The ratio is not arbitrary. Every credit of damage you cause has been repaid 1,000-fold. Every life you took has been answered with the destruction of 1,000 jobs. But unlike you, we ensured no lives were lost in our response. This is not mercy. This is education. You believed our preference for diplomacy indicated weakness. You have now learned otherwise. The choice before you is simple. Restore what you destroyed and compensate the families of those you killed, or we will demonstrate that this response was merely a preview of our capabilities. You have 1 standard week to begin reparations. After that, we will adjust the ratio to 10,000 to 1. Choose wisely." The message repeated in every Craxan dialect, its mathematics precise, its implications clear. Emperor Zaxthrax stood in silence as the message cycled through again. Around him, his advisors shifted uncomfortably, their carapaces clicking against their ceremonial armor. "Supreme Commander," the Emperor finally spoke, his voice unnaturally quiet. "You assured me they were weak, that they would respond with diplomatic protests and sanctions." Crixtel's translator couldn't capture the complex mix of terror and realization in his response. "Majesty, I was wrong. They weren't weak. They were waiting, watching, learning. Every diplomatic exchange, every trade agreement, they were studying us, understanding us. And now," the Emperor demanded, "now they've shown us that they choose diplomacy not because they must, but because they prefer it to the alternative." Crixtel's mandibles trembled. "And they've demonstrated exactly why we should prefer it as well." In the silence that followed, the message continued to broadcast across Craxan space, a mathematical equation of justice that could not be argued with, only accepted. The lesson had been delivered. The clock was ticking. The Vindari War Ambassador's private chamber aboard the assembly station was a marvel of antagonistic architecture. Every surface was designed to put visitors on edge, from the slightly too steep steps to the chairs calibrated to be just uncomfortable enough to keep occupants alert. War Ambassador Catal liked it that way. In 15,000 years of spacefaring civilization, the Vindari had learned that discomfort bred honesty. Right now, watching the Mezeran cultural attaché squirm in her seat, he appreciated that wisdom more than ever. "You understand why I called this meeting," Catal rumbled, his crystalline skin refracting the room's harsh lighting. "The humans have changed everything." The Mezeran, her feathered crest flattening in distress, bobbed her head. "We've analyzed their response pattern extensively. It's unprecedented. Most species either show restraint or escalate to total war. This calculated middle ground." She trailed off, mandibles clicking nervously. "It's elegant," came a new voice. From the shadows emerged Ambassador Xan of the Silicum consciousness, their holographic form flickering with complex equations. "We've run 10,947 simulations of potential responses to the Craxan raids. Not one of our predictions matched the humans' actual response." Catal leaned forward. "Because they think differently. The Craxans believed they were dealing with prey animals, herbivores who had grown soft through civilization. But that's not what humans are, is it, San?" The Silicon consciousness's avatar sparkled with new calculations. "Humans are pursuit predators. But unlike the Craxans or even your own species, War Ambassador, they evolved to exhaust their prey through persistence. They don't strike for the kill immediately. They wait. They plan. They ensure victory before the first move is made." In another part of the station, different conversations were taking place. The merchant princes of the Orion Arm gathered in their luxurious trading halls, their usual haggling replaced by worried discussions. "We must distance ourselves from the Craxans immediately," declared Prime Merchant Vex, his gill slits pulsing with anxiety. "The humans control too many key trading routes. We cannot risk association." "But their markets," protested another merchant, "the resource vacuum their destroyed facilities have created is nothing compared to what the humans could do to us." Vex cut in. "Did you not analyze their response? They didn't just strike military or economic targets. They sent a message that every species in the galaxy could understand. Cross us, and we will hurt you exactly as much as we choose to." In the Assembly's primary chamber, the eldest of the Jutai philosophers addressed a private gathering of species considered neutral in galactic politics. For 10,000 years, the ancient being wheezed, its translucent skin pulsing with bioluminescent thoughts, "We have categorized spacefaring species into basic types. The warriors, the merchants, the builders, the scholars. But humans refuse categorization." A junior member raised an appendage. "Surely their response indicates they belong among the warriors." The eldest's skin flashed with what might have been amusement. A warrior species would have destroyed the Kraxan fleet. A merchant species would have demanded economic concessions. A builder species would have fortified their colonies. Instead, the humans demonstrated something new: the capacity to be any of these, or all of them, as the situation requires. Back in the Vindari chamber, Catal was reaching a similar conclusion. The humans didn't just punish the Kraxans, he said, rising to pace the room. They revealed something about themselves that changes the galaxy's power dynamics forever. They showed us that their diplomatic nature isn't a weakness to be exploited, but a choice to be respected. The Mezeran attaches crest rose slightly, because the alternative is precise, calculated destruction. It's uncompleted. They don't destroy out of anger or vendetta. They destroy with purpose, with mathematical certainty, and they ensure everyone survives to remember the lesson. Catal stopped at his viewport, watching the distant Earth ships docked at the station. We've all been studying humans since they joined the assembly, trying to understand their contradictions. Now we know they're not controversial. They're comprehensive. In the depths of space, alien species began redrawing their maps of power and influence, adding new calculations to old equations. The galaxy was changing, not through force of arms or economic might, but through the revelation of what happened when patience was pushed too far. The diplomatic dance had new steps, and everyone was scrambling to learn them. The Great Hall of the Interstellar Assembly had never seen a gathering quite like this. Representatives from every spacefaring species packed the chamber, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic civilization. The air hummed with translation devices and the subtle vibrations of different atmospheric requirements. Emperor Zax Thrax of the Kraxan Empire stood before the assembly's central podium, his massive form diminished somehow. Gone were the traditional weapons of his office. Gone was the proud stance that had characterized Kraxan leaders for generations. His carapace, once iridescent with pride, had dulled to the gray of profound humility. "The Kraxan Empire," he began, his translator converting clicking mandibles into measured words, "formally surrenders to the Sol Federation." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Not at the surrender itself, that had been inevitable after humanity's response, but at the completeness of it. Kraxan leaders didn't surrender. They negotiated, they compromised, they maneuvered, but they never surrendered. Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth stood from her seat, datapad in hand. "The Sol Federation acknowledges the Kraxan Empire's surrender. We have prepared a complete accounting of required reparations." The chamber's holofields activated, displaying columns of numbers and calculations. Dr. Sarah Morrison stepped forward, her precise movements drawing every eye in the chamber. "The economic damage inflicted on our colonies totaled exactly 47.3 billion credits," she stated, each word crisp and clear. "Our response destroyed exactly 47.3 trillion credits worth of Kraxan infrastructure, a ratio of 1,000 to 1. As promised, more figures appeared, breaking down the damage with surgical precision. 243 lives were lost in the Kraxan raids," Morrison continued. "In response, we destroyed the livelihoods of exactly 243,000 Kraxan citizens. But," she paused, ensuring every translation device had caught up, "we ensured 0 casualties in our strikes." The Emperor's mandibles clicked rapidly as he studied the figures. The precision, even our own economists couldn't calculate the damage this accurately. "How did you?" "We had complete access to your networks," Morrison interrupted. "Every transaction, every resource evaluation, every economic projection. We didn't guess at the values. We knew them." Colonel Santos stepped forward next, adding military context to the economic figures. Each strike was calibrated to maximize economic impact while minimizing loss of life. "We could have destroyed your military installations. We could have targeted your fleet. Instead, we chose to demonstrate something more important: control." The assembly chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This hadn't been just about punishment. This had been about showing the galaxy that humans could choose exactly how much damage to inflict, down to the last credit. Ambassador Chen touched her datapad, and new figures appeared. The reparations schedule is precise. You will rebuild our colonies first, replacing every destroyed structure with an exact replica. Then you will compensate every family who lost someone in your raids. The amounts have been calculated based on projected lifetime earnings and emotional impact. And if we fail to meet these terms, the Emperor asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then we demonstrate that 1,000 to 1 was merely our opening ratio, Chen replied softly. The next lesson would be taught at 10,000 to 1. I trust that won't be necessary. The Emperor's translator struggled to capture the complex emotions in his response. We understand. The Kraxan Empire accepts these terms without reservation. As the Emperor stepped down from the podium, Ambassador Chen turned to address the entire assembly. Let the record show that humanity's response was proportional, precise, and purposeful. We chose to destroy infrastructure rather than lives. We chose to teach rather than annihilate. She paused, her gaze sweeping the chamber. This was not mercy. This was mathematics. Remember that the next time you mistake our preference for diplomacy as weakness. The assembly chambers remained silent long after the formal surrender concluded. Species that had witnessed countless wars and countless peace treaties had just seen something new. A response that was neither vengeful nor weak, but calculated to the last decimal point. The galaxy had learned a vital lesson. Humans didn't just fight wars. They calculated them. 6 months after the Kraxan's surrender, the Interstellar Assembly's corridors buzzed with a new kind of energy. Species that once clustered by traditional alliances now mixed freely. Their conversations focused on a single topic: the changes humanity had brought to galactic society. In the Assembly's prestigious Library of Diplomatic Records, Junior Diplomat Vextil of the reformed Kraxan Empire sat across from human Ambassador Chen Wei. Between them lay a holographic display showing the reconstruction of New Montana colony. The buildings are exact replicas. Vextil noted, his once proud mandibles now moving with studied humility, down to the last detail. Chen nodded. Your reconstruction teams have done excellent work. The colonists will be able to return next month. There is something I must ask. Vextil's translator wavered slightly. During the strikes against our facilities, why did you ensure 0 casualties? You could have killed thousands, and it would have been considered justified under galactic law. Chen's expression softened slightly. Because death is binary. You can't calculate it, can't proportion it, can't use it to teach. But economic damage. She gestured at the reconstruction plans. That can be measured, adjusted, and most importantly, reversed. Elsewhere in the station, the Assembly's Committee on Conflict Resolution was in session. The newly established human protocols were being formally adopted into galactic law. War Ambassador Katal of the Vindari, now serving as committee chair, addressed the gathered representatives. The protocols establish new guidelines for proportional response. No longer will we simply speak of appropriate force. Now, every action must be quantifiable, calculable, and most importantly, reversible. In the station's diplomatic quarter, Dr. Sarah Morrison sat with representatives from 12 species, all seeking to understand humanity's approach to conflict. You must understand, she explained, humans learned long ago that true power isn't about maximum force, it's about precise control. When we went silent for those 2 weeks, we weren't planning destruction. We were calculating justice. A Mezoran representative raised her feathered crest. But surely such precise calculations take too long in a crisis. Morrison smiled. That's why we prepare. Every human colony, every trade route, every diplomatic relationship comes with predetermined response matrices. We know exactly how we'll respond to any situation before it occurs. The Silicon Consciousness's avatar flickered with interest. You turned warfare into an equation. No, Morrison corrected gently. We turned peace into an equation. War is chaos. What we demonstrated was something else entirely: controlled consequence. In the Assembly's central chamber, the final session of the day was concluding. The first speaker raised her luminescent appendages for attention. "Let the record show that the galaxy has entered a new era," her translated voice echoed through the chamber. "The human protocols are now law. All species must register the value of their assets, the worth of their territories, and establish clear matrices for proportional response." Ambassador Chen stood to address the chamber one final time. "We did not want this demonstration. We would have preferred to maintain peace through diplomacy alone. But now that we have shown our capabilities, let us be clear. Humanity will always prefer dialogue over destruction. Not because we are weak, but because we understand the price of escalation better than most." As the session ended, a young Kraxan diplomat approached Chen in the corridor. "Ambassador," he clicked hesitantly, "my studies show that humans have a saying. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Yet you took 1,000 eyes for each one. How do you reconcile this?" Chen stopped, considering her response carefully. "We took no eyes at all. We demonstrated the cost of taking eyes, and we ensured everyone survived to understand that cost. Sometimes the best way to prevent violence is to show exactly what it will cost, down to the last credit." Across the station, across the galaxy, species began to adapt to the new reality. Trade agreements now included precise response clauses. Diplomatic protocols now required detailed value assessments. The galaxy hadn't become more peaceful overnight, but it had become more measured. Humanity had changed the rules of conflict forever, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through something far more fundamental: the application of mathematics to morality. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly the point.